Kat, who is going from Family Action. Kat is now ready and available to speak to us.
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can. That's great.
Ah, fantastic. Okay, I'll talk very quickly through what I've been asked to talk about. It's a very practical overview of how and why we involved service users and ex-service users in our project development prior to going for the innovation bid. Having listened to Sophie and also to Joe with some really interesting points, I think it's important that I say that this came very much from a practice base. We were looking at it as a problem. We were doing some research around the theory that and evidence that was already out there. But from my point of view as a social worker, I was also drawing very much on my experience of working with looked after young children and young people, and also young people in the criminal justice system. So it's a very practical overview that I'd like to give you now, really. You've got in front of you a bit of an overview of what the Safe Haven project would look like and the programme is about. But fundamentally, it's about working with young people who come into care, possibly quite late in life, and who struggle to settle into placements and therefore have high levels of risk. Often multiple placements which are reactive rather than proactive, and have lots of issues which they cannot deal with because they are struggling to have any kind of stability in their lives in order to then look at working therapeutically or addressing the issues that go on to affect the outcomes for them. One of the things I think is really important to say at this point is that we were looking at this from very short timescales. And so thinking through and listening to everyone who's been around and spoken previously, we were very much thinking we had to do this quite quickly, but at the same time it had to be meaningful, it had to have an impact, and we had to listen to what these young people had to say about their own experiences and about what they wanted from the system. So where we actually brought them in was that we had, as I said before, done some research about what we felt the problem was. And when I say we, I mean professionals, looking at these cohorts that are unfortunately around in every local authority across the country, and put together an idea of what we felt could be a solution. And at that point, we decided we need to check this out with two sets of very important individuals, young people who are currently in the care system and who could be part of the cohort that we were looking at. So young people who were over 11 years of age, who had come into care later on in life and who were very much struggling to settle into placements, either foster care or residential. That was one group, one cohort that we wanted to speak to and engage with in a really meaningful way. The second group that we wanted to engage with was people who had come out of the other side, so they had experienced care. Again, they were the cohort of people that we were looking to put in place a system that would help. But they actually had a little bit more time to reflect on what bits worked for them, what bits didn't, the effects on them in later life. So two separate groups, but both, in our view, incredibly important to speak to engage with, and to listen to. Our next point was, okay, how do we engage with these people? And from our point of view, we didn't want to be doing to them, we wanted to be doing with them. We wanted to ask them and get the best from them by making it a process that was comfortable. So with that in mind, we looked at very different ways, and we offered them different ways to become involved. So, for example, the young people who are currently in care, we did ask, would you like to speak to us individually, either face-to-face or on the telephone, or would you like to meet in a group to support each other? How best does it work for you? And in the main, that group of young people wanted to do it in a group. They wanted us to go to them and to give them ways and to agree with them ways that they could have their say, put their input in. In the main, with the older group of ex-service users, again, we offered them different ways of doing it, and they chose different ways. So we had people who wanted to meet on a one-to-one basis to talk things through. We had a lot of people who wanted to do a telephone interview, and a couple of people who preferred to put things in writing. So what we did at that point was give them very different ways of being involved to allow them the best way for them to express themselves. And so that's what we did. If I can talk first about the issues with the young people in care at the moment, one of the things that we felt very strongly was that this group of young people were actually not really engaging with services very well at the moment, and therefore it was even more important that we engage with them in some way to get a better understanding of what they would want and what would make a difference to them. So we had a meeting. We provided food. Food is always a good option, I'm told, for young people, and it seems to work very well. So we offered refreshments, etc. And we had a period of time where we had a variety of different tasks that they could be involved in, from speaking, just generally talking things through, questions and answers, to doing some artwork around what a safe haven would look like for them, all different kinds of interactive activities, even so far as having a life-size drawing of a person on a piece of wallpaper, which they could write the key characteristics that they would want in a carer onto that piece of paper. So, very interactive ways for them to become involved. With the adults who had been through the care system, we had a question and answer session and some key questions that we wanted them to answer, but we also had a very open question around them telling us their stories and then being able to work through their stories and examine key points within those stories that had made a difference to them, both positively and negatively. So after doing those consultations, we ended up with rather a lot of information, mainly of a story type basis, but with some key questions. Interestingly then, we had to go back and look very clearly at the model that we had proposed and make some changes to it, because the young people themselves and the ex-service users were saying, I can see why you're thinking that, but actually we would prefer this. And we could see very clearly how they had reached that point and what thought process had taken place and what the benefits would be. So if I can just give you a couple of examples, we had drawn up very basic, but job descriptions, person specs for the team of people who would be involved in the safe haven. Not to go into too much detail, but there were a number of different roles. In doing the consultation, we got a very clear view of what young people would want from those roles, what were the key characteristics, as well as things, obviously, that we would find important, like qualifications, etc., key characteristics, key qualities of the people that they would feel that they could bond with and therefore could make a difference to their lives. We had part of the model of the safe haven is that we work with birth families, because our view was very much around the fact that very often young people come into care and not always, but sometimes the work with birth families ceases, and therefore these young people continue to have contact with their birth families, whether we want them to or not in a lot of cases, and sometimes that can be very negative because there's been a breakdown in communication or things have been said, etc. So we felt it was important that there was ongoing work with birth families, and kind of tying into what Sophie was saying actually, so that history didn't repeat itself perhaps, so we could work with the birth families about improving their parenting capacity so that there weren't ongoing problems with younger children in the family, or less so. During the consultation, it became very clear that the young people and the ex-service users were saying very clearly, we would not want the person who was our key worker to be the person who was working with our parents, our birth families. It's important to us that that person is ours. And so it made us rethink and look at different options for those teams. Really, really key things to look at. So that was really important and very, very helpful. And I think it's important to say that all this is going in very tight timescales, because obviously the timescales are quite tight, but also there's a lot of work that needs doing and building on in order to get things done in a timely fashion. So it isn't impossible. It could be done better, I suggest, with a longer time period, but it's not impossible to do good, meaningful and useful consultation. One of the things that was very clear during that process was that, yes, the consultation prior to implementation and prior to writing the bid was very, very important and was very, very helpful. But it was important to write into the programme ongoing consultation and testing and food production. So, yes, we involved them at the beginning, but we looked to and we asked about opportunities for them to be involved moving forward. So, having a management model, an oversight model, which included service users and ex-service users, so that at every point that consultation was ongoing. So for us, we found that it was incredibly powerful. There were lots of stories, which I won't go into because I know a lot of people listening in will understand entirely and have lots of their own stories that they could tell. But very, very powerful, impactful and useful in helping us to actually put together what we believe to be a programme of intervention which could reach some very hard to reach and disengaged young people.
That's fantastic, Kat. Thank you very much indeed.